Man, are you just like sneaking? You're just sneaking the recordings on us. I know you are. I'm like out here talking shit, and this man just starts it.
Good morning, everyone. This is Ryan Ryan checking in with the three buddy problem. This is episode 28 with my buddies Costin and Juanito. Happy New Year to all our listeners. Happy New Year
Happy
to you
New
guys. How
Year.
are you, Juan?
Good, man. It's actually a really exciting start of the year. I think, like I said, last year was a really rough one, and frankly, it feels like we're just kicking off in like a completely different direction. So, for once, I will say that I am optimistic and pretty excited about what's coming this time around. Um,
Very good.
yeah,
It's exciting to hear from you. Usually,
right?
you're like this musty old
A ray
curmudgeon
of
who's
sunshine over here. Yeah.
yeah. How are you, Costin? What's going on out in Bucharest?
Yeah, it's good. It's good. We just came back from the mountains. We were again in in the Transylvania area near Dracula's famous castle, and it was like a terrible fog, like in the movies. The kind of fog that is so dark and gloomy, and you think that the vampires will come over, or you'll get eaten by the wolves. So now we're back in Bucharest, where it's nice and shiny.
So from Mr. Sunshine to Dracula's darkness, I think we have a good mix. I'm all hopped up on scissor with a bad cough and some fever, so I'm gonna try and push through and not fall asleep before this
I
episode.
assumed it was recreational, but I will take it either way.
No, it's not recreational. I wish. Let's start with the news, guys. Let's just jump right in. The big story here in the US, obviously, is this BeyondTrust remote support SaaS security service security investigation. We mentioned this on the pod, I think it was last week, kind of casually because we didn't have much information. And I made the point that whenever you talk about this PAM software, this privileged access management software, it raises the nape on your neck because of the sensitivity of this kind of access. It turns out that the infrastructure there, the Beyond Trust was compromised, and something was stolen, and allowed Chinese state-sponsored hackers to breach the US Treasury Department. Juan, what do you know about this?
Not too much, to be honest. And
Still,
and yeah, still like frankly, so the Beyond Trust thing really came on our radars. I want to say about almost 2 weeks ago, and folks have kind of been digging in, but like you said, there wasn't a whole lot of information. And then now we know that there's this high-profile victim, but even then, there's not a whole lot of information. So the fact that they went after OFAC, I think, is actually really interesting. I think that might be one of the more interesting offices in the government. But like as far as like targeting for any kind of APT, but we're still not getting anything. You're just, we kind of know to link these two things together, and there's a vague assurance that there's a high-end cybersecurity company involved in this, but that's it. That's fucking it.
you mentioned OFAC. The reporting is that the attackers specifically targeted the Office of Foreign Assets Control. This is the office that imposes foreign sanctions, and China is being blamed here. It's been very clear that this is a Chinese state-sponsored threat actor. Costin, why would the Chinese be worried about would want to get into OFAC? That would sound like it would be more Russian to me.
That was my idea. That was my question when we started talking about it. Honestly, I think it would be good to know why U.S. officials claims that this is a Chinese state-sponsored threat actor. Like, why China? I mean, maybe they have the evidence, maybe they know more, but at the moment, I haven't seen either the name of the actor, which Salt, Volt, Mold, whatever typhoon it is. So I mean, I don't know. We don't know. It perhaps it could be something else. I don't want to be like the one who is like always against the might of Mr. America.
Come on. I don't know anything about that. No, but come on. I could see why they would care about this in particular at this time, right? So, look, I don't know that it's the Chinese. I have literally no idea why they would say that it's the Chinese. At the same time, if you tell me that it is the Chinese, I don't have a hard time considering the timing right now, right? Like, what is OFAC's involvement with any potential tariffs and discussions about like economic warfare, for lack of a better term, against China right before a Trump administration starts? Like, yeah, I could see why you want to go in there.
If are we generally believing the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post reporting when they say government officials say? Do you generally, Juan, have a good solid feel that WAPO gets things right? And I asked the
Yeah.
question specifically because they're reporting that a top area of interest for Chinese government, current and former officials said, would be Chinese entities that the US government may be considering designating for financial sanctions. They also say that the hack also compromised the Treasury Department's Office of Financial Records, and the full impact, which was disclosed by Treasury Department, by the way, in a letter to Congress, is still being assessed. So they're connecting those two things, and I want to know if the reporting in your mind, when you read the WAPO's reporting, do you generally get a sense that it's reliable?
Look, I think forget WAPO, right? Like, and I can answer that, but forget WAPO. Anytime anyone briefs Congress, you're basically asking for that to make it to the news, right? Like, there's no way you ever brief Congress without it essentially being an unintended but completely expected leak, right? So in that sense, I don't have a hard time thinking that there are sources that are saying this. At the same time, it usually goes to the usual filtering that happens whenever anything goes to Congress, which is like it becomes a game of telephone. There was a briefing that maybe said this thing that was read by a congressional staffer that was then briefed to a 75-year-old congressperson who then talked to the reporter, and in that game of telephone the level of entropy with factuality and details tends to be quite high. At the same time, like I said, not a hard time believing any of what we're reading. It just is not substantive enough to know anything about it. And it's not like other threat actors aren't probably living in OFAC anyways. So, what exactly are we discussing right now other than like a very specific situation? That said, to your point about WAPO, um, they've always done good work, right? Particularly when you see that it's Joe Men, but like Ellen Nakashima does a good job, and she's got amazing access, right? It's like if David Sanger level access, but Ellen usually brings somebody else that can verify some of the technical stuff alongside, so the coverage is better.
Right.
David doesn't bother doing that.
I asked about WAPO and reliability and whether you trust it because of that, because we've had issues in the past, especially with the New York Times and like poor quality reporting, no interest in correcting things.
Yeah.
So that's why I asked the
No,
question.
but
I would just
WAPO's
want,
solid, and like if it were Joe Men, I'd take it to the bank completely. But like as far as like having access in DC and then trying to do a bit of your homework, you get good stuff with Ella and Nakashima, and I say that about like somebody verifying because I mean she's more of like a broader national security like DC reporter, but I appreciate that she usually finds somebody to like ride side saddle,
right.
which David Sanger doesn't seem to feel the need to do. At the same time, while we're at it, right, like it's clearly not about the outfit doing the reporting. As I don't know if you guys saw this Reuters story recently about Salt Typhoon and AT&T and T and a couple of other shops.
Oh, you mean about them being completely? Yeah, I have it on the list. We'll get to it in a second.
Yeah, yeah.
I have it on the list. I just want to make a point here that in October 24th, 2024, so October last year, BeyondTrust issued a big giant press release saying that they had signed the CISA pledge. So I just want I
October?
I wanted to throw it in there because they issued a press release that's saying by signing CISA Secure by Design pledge, BeyondTrust solidifies its dedication to the U.S. federal government's cybersecurity objectives. Like this is the ridiculousness of all of this, right? A company gets compromised and gives nation state access to the US Treasury, OFAC department, and access to everything. And we're celebrating this sign of freaking pledge, right? I mean, the idea that the US government is using software that allows that, there's no least privilege, there's no, help me understand how we're accepting this bullshit.
Well, because it's the only choice we've got. Like, there's no accepting or not accepting beyond like, God giving us the strength to accept the things we cannot change. Like, there's just no the the way that what I'm curious about here more than anything else is whether Beyond Trust knew they were popped before they signed the pledge. And I don't mean before we all found out that there was an issue or that OFAC was involved or publicly the incident doesn't start until December. But did they know before they engaged in the CISA pledge is something that I'd be very curious, because at that point, quite forgive my perennial cynicism, but at that point it means even the company itself thought of the CISA pledge as good PR for handling a bad incident. Yeah.
Is this an O-Day? Do we know what happened on the BeyondTrust side? Costin, have you been following this?
I have, but there's not much information, so I think we don't know. We don't know how they got in. And again, I see Juan doesn't want to offend everyone,
Yeah, he's very
like some
subdued
people
today.
are saying. Like we politely offend everybody, but not certain people. Clearly.
No, no, no. Dude, I don't mind if, look, I am trying to, I'm trying to make sure that, like, I'm it's not even fair. I just want to make sure, like, the I'm saving the rants for the right ones, and I feel like this
Ah.
episode has one that I am not going to be able to help myself on. So I'm trying to be as nice as possible. In contrast, not to strike the same note for everything we talk about.
Palo Alto also confirmed another O-Day exploited in the wild since we last spoke. CVE 2024-3393 impacts the DNS security feature of the PAN-OS software that runs on Palo Alto Network's firewalls. And I bring this up because, again, it's O-Day, and it's these vendors who've all signed these pledges, and it's just like this continuous hamster wheel of O-Days. In the last 3 years, 2022, there were 54 documented O-Days in the wild. 2023, 98. In 2024, there were 93 last year. So between 2022 and 2024,
In
we've had...
general, or you mean for these specific?
No, in general, all. But between 2022 and 2024, we've had 245 O-Days documented. We've talked in the past about why are we better at finding it? Is there more action happening? Is it just, security tools have gotten better? When these numbers, do these numbers pop out at you, Costin, or is this just a sense of normalcy now?
I mean, I was looking at your more detailed numbers here, including like which companies are responsible for most of these vulnerabilities, and you see, I was wondering like who's leading, but it seems to me, if I'm not mistaken, Microsoft has the most vulnerabilities in there in Windows, right?
20% of the 245 was in Windows. Apple iOS had another 10%, Mac OS 2%. So it's Microsoft, Google, and Apple. Well, for obvious reasons, they're the
Makes
most used
sense.
software. I mean, it makes the most sense.
They're the biggest. They're the biggest vendors as well. I was thinking that with iOS, there's, I don't know, certain awareness in the sense that we do get these bulletins which say this vulnerability may have been massively exploited in the wild, or things like that.
Those are my favorites.
They are my favorites, and the ones where there's no public naming or attribution to the person who reported it, like the researcher wants to stay anonymous, or the organization who reported these vulnerabilities wants to remain anonymous. Those are the best, in my opinion.
We
when you
refuse
see
to
that,
pay the person who did this, so we're just not going to name it. Yeah.
when you see that, what is it? Does it like set off alarm bells in your head, or it's just you're just making fun of Apple just not giving a shit about any sort of disclosure?
In my mind, those are like probably the most interesting ones, because like it always, in my mind, it says NSA or whoever. And what is the most interesting is how they caught that vulnerability, the means through which the vulnerability was discovered. Was it through some CNE against adversary networks? They managed to lift the exploit from some attack that they were forward-partying and observing. So those are like just interesting when they show up.
I wish the world were quite like that. I
Yeah.
could assume that's the case.
Mm.
In my mind, I'm like, whose employer did not allow them to actually discuss this, and they reported it, in whatever capacity, right?
That's
Because that's
sad.
happening a lot. Like, I'll say one of the quiet parts out loud, particularly with the appliance vendors and all these O-Days. Part of the reason that I'm so harsh on the appliance vendors is that I know for a fact they're not discovering the majority of these O-Days themselves. They're not even finding them in their own telemetry, anything like that. There are fourth parties that keep running into other they're investigating broader components of larger attacks, and they keep tripping over the O days that are getting used along the way
What do you mean
and
by fourth
letting
party?
well the way that Ryan's dying right now, coughing his freaking face off. Um, the way that these investigations work, like I've usually been quite like verbose and dramatic in saying like we're in a very special time when it comes to like what threat intelligence is, because you basically have these intelligence operations, and for the first time in history you have these fourth parties in the middle of it that have nothing to do with the attack, right? Like the treasury is the victim, and let's assume the Chinese government office of whatever, or the MSS, is the attacker. And in the past that intelligence dynamic would have been fairly closed off, and maybe you had third parties, as in like intelligence services of other countries or along the way, who may interfere in some capacity and see what's going on. With threat intel, what you have now is a series of fourth parties that control the pipes along the way. They are a service provider along the way. They're an endpoint security provider along the way. They're a random researcher who just had the right YARA rules along the way, who become aware and inject themselves in the middle of this dynamic between two other, actually interested intelligence parties. And what that entails is that there are a shit ton of collectors, who have a genuine, legitimate, vested interest. Like the way Kosin, you keep joking about how, in the US we're saying, hey, don't use VPNs so that the ISP can let you know that you're hacked. And you're like, well, that means they're watching. And I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what I'm referring to right now. The ISP, the VPS provider, the endpoint security provider, the DNS provider, the network security appliance in the middle of it, the MSSP that you contracted. There's like 12 different parties along the way who can have visibility into some portion of an attack, and most of them are quiet about it. And thank God that they're here. But my point, the one that I keep harping on, the reason I shit on these appliance vendors so much, is they're acting as if they're defending their ecosystem. Like Fortinet and all these guys now are out there like, oh yeah, we patched this thing. Here's a little blog for you. And we're like, yeah, motherfuckers, but you didn't find this. You didn't discover it. It's not because of your defenses or your traps or your telemetry or
It's
how
all
much
being
effort
handed
you're
to them.
putting it. It's being fucking handed to you, and you're doing a shit job patching it. So clearly, even that part you're kind of sleeping on. But let's be abundantly clear that you did not discover this. It's not because of the proactive measures that you've taken. Someone is handing you this, and you're just taking a nice little victory lap about how great you are in defending this shit product, but you don't deserve it.
They all signed the pledge, though. What do you think happens to the pledge?
Bro.
Dude, that
Stop.
pledge thing, the pledge thing gets to me. The first thing I do is go to their website to see if they signed the pledge. As soon as they get popped, I'm like, okay.
We need like a purity ring. What was it, like the Jonas Brothers with that shit? That's there's some swag in there. We could definitely prepare.
Can
Speaking
we
of
do
these,
like a no VPN pledge, something like that?
oh yeah, Costin is on his VPN, Mitch.
Yeah, man.
Reuters is reporting that AT&T and Verizon has finally, for the first time, acknowledged the Salt Typhoon attack. So we'll give them some credit there. We got a quote from a lawyer. Lawyers are doing a threat intelligence quote now. And let me read it. We have not detected threat actor activity in Verizon's network for some time. And after considerable work addressing this incident, we can report that Verizon has contained the activities associated with this particular incident. Verizon's chief legal officer said in a statement. Verizon said an independent and highly respected cybersecurity firm has confirmed the containment. Juan, what does containment mean?
I have no fucking clue. I have no fucking clue what that means. I also, anytime somebody says a highly respected cybersecurity firm but doesn't name Mandiant, I immediately am dubious. And it's not because Mandiant's the only good one, but because the good ones tend to not have a problem being named. So when you say it's highly respected, it might be like IBM is doing the IR, and you're like, IBM is not highly respected for IR. They're just highly respected for something, you
Maybe
know, so,
IBM.
for corporate culture. I don't know, like, you know,
Laptops.
for no, I mean, I will refrain from Nazi databasing jokes, but I just yeah, whenever you do something like that and like you don't actually name the companies that tend to be good about this are a little attention hoary, and they're comfortable being like, because that's what you're paying for, right? Like in a way, you are part of what you're paying Mandiant for is for them to lend you the air of legitimacy of saying, hey, this is being taken care of by somebody competent. Like maybe we suck, but like we paid the right person who's going to take care of this. So when you don't name them, I'm immediately like,
Mm.
Does that
who
mean
the
it's not
fuck is
You
doing this?
automatically, the fact that they don't name Mandiant means to you that it's not Mandiant.
Not necessarily, but I don't understand. Like, it's almost like you paid for a brand and then left that value on the table. It doesn't make too much sense to me. Um, but it could be, you know.
Costin, AT&T, Verizon, and Lumen say they have now evicted Salt Typhoon from their networks. Does that give you a sense of confidence that, we're in the clear?
Well, on one hand, let's say that they evicted the group from their networks. What about the other? What was it? A dozen other
There were
ISPs?
9 total so
Nine
Just
far.
total.
Yeah.
9, bro. Come
Eh,
on.
the number fluctuates. Like they keep finding new ones after the recommendations from CISA. So I mean, okay, these are like big players, right? So I would assume that maybe the smaller players may not have evicted the hacking group. When I just hear these stories about evictions, like one thing comes to mind, which is Turla, the good old Turla guys, randomly popping ministries of foreign affairs, ministries of interior, and so on, in coming back like over and over again. Like even if you rebuild everything from scratch, you get rid of everything, reinstall all the servers, and then they keep coming back through some kind of a loophole that you missed. They know people who were involved in doing incident response with this and with other groups. At some point, they just said like, we're gonna stop saying that we evicted them because we can't be sure anymore. Like we can't guarantee that they will not return through something that we didn't know about it. They have persistence on one of the routers, they have persistence in a remote location, and they minted golden tickets, and they have all sorts of tricks that our EDR solutions just don't catch anymore. So they were
I mean,
careful. Like
and
I
that was the
learned.
point of Penguin, Turla at the time, right? Like that was what we saw with them using components that they would, hide out in like a Linux box, right? It's like the same
Mm,
thing that happened with the DNC when
DNC
CrowdStrike went
hack.
in to do
Right.
that.
Mm,
It's what happened at Ruag with Turla.
correct.
But uh, in this case, I don't actually know whether any of these places have cleaned up or not, and I didn't immediately assume that they were telling the truth or not, because what I'm watching here is a bit of like a media circus that I think is really shitty and reprehensible, right? Like I wanted to make fun of Reuters because in this particular case, and these are obviously not the cyber like reporters, right? Like if this was AJ Vicens or like, Raphael Satter or Chris Bing in his time, you would know that they talked to some people and they got a second opinion and they talked to other folks, and and they're going to report the fact that like this is a claim that could be dubious and that people are concerned, or maybe they evicted them and they'll come back. But instead, like whoever these reporters are, they literally just took like a couple of like PR statements and wrote like it was complete stenography, right? Like we
But
took
what
a
else can they do,
corporate.
though? I mean,
They can fucking talk to some other expert in the industry or literally anybody else who
right,
who
but
could
nobody.
verify that claim.
What
Like
is to
who could even
verify?
well, you could even speculate about the fact that like it's possible that what they're saying is not I'm not even claiming these companies are lying. Like AT&T and Verizon have good defense teams. They have good researchers. They interact. Like AT&T owns they bought Alien Vault, they have OTX. They have amazing people at AT&T. I don't doubt them that they are doing everything in their power to evict these people. I think the real problem here, A, is the reporters at Reuters clearly didn't even bother to check like what this means, or like what does it even mean. And then the bigger problem for me is that I think this is a media circus kicked off by the weird like Schrodinger's T-Mobile hack, where it's like the same day T-Mobile claimed that they were not affected by Salt Typhoon and that they caught Salt Typhoon in their servers at the same time. They issue like it was like complete cognitive dissonance. Like you had a statement that says we did not get hacked, and you had the CISO in I think a Bloomberg story saying, yeah, we caught them in the servers and then we stopped them. Those two are very fucking different things. But I think once they did that and got away with it, you almost have this pressure on every other ISP and telco to make a bland statement that says, yeah, we're good too. Whether it's true or not, it doesn't even matter. It's just that from a branding standpoint, from a potential like congressional testimony standpoint, like you almost just everybody just needs to at some point come out with a bland statement that says, yeah, they're out. Yeah, we're good. And that's what I think there's more pressure because of that external circumstance to make this statement that I think we normally would never hear at the end of a hack, where you normally don't get that confident postmortem where somebody says, yeah, we're done, we're good. And you go, how could you
Let,
possibly know, right?
let me amplify this specific point a little bit. How are you so sure from a deep technical perspective that there's an eviction that happened? Costin, if I bring you in and I
I
give
can
you
tell you.
my machine gets compromised, and I bring you in
Mm,
and say, Costin, look at this machine for me, and then you
mm,
come up to me a week later and say it's all clean. Where do you
mm,
get that level of confidence from?
mm. So I'll tell you how this happens in practice. So let's say you get infected or whoever gets infected. Then we go there, we find what's going on, we collect network logs, and we say like, okay, the hackers are coming through these IP addresses or through these remote connections, whatever. And then we set up monitoring for these kind of things, all of them that we know about them and more. And then we monitor everything for a month or two or three, and we don't catch anything new. Then we say, it looks like we evicted the hackers from your
Right,
computer.
but you see
It
what you
looks
said
like.
there, right? Looks like.
It looks like. This is what I'm saying. Like we don't have any sign that they are still active in your network. So then the CISO or the lawyers or whoever say, "Oh, so you mean we're clean now?" And I'm like, maybe no, or yes, we don't know, but there's no signs that they are still here. So they go to the press and say, we evicted the hackers from our network. So there's always like this difference or separation between what people say publicly and what the respectable incident response companies tell their customers.
Juan, you mentioned you're not saying they're lying, obviously, but do
Mm,
you believe they've been evicted?
I'm not saying they're lying, and it's not even out of like respect for these companies in particular, though. Like Alex Pinto at Verizon, Nimrod at AT&T. Like you have good people whom I trust in at all these places,
Same
and
with
obviously
Lumen. We have friends at
Danny
Lumen that we
Adamitis, Ryan
respect, right?
English. Like there's Michael Horka. There's great people at Lumens. I respect and trust all of these people, and I'm sure they're working very
But these
hard
people
to
are not
whatever
talking to
extent.
us, right?
Well, to whatever extent they're not allowed to,
To Costin's
to
point, we're
just
only
say it
hearing
out.
from the lawyers, right?
Well, that's what I wanted to point to, which is that it's not just that we're hearing from the lawyers, it's that we're getting statements in which there's just no room for nuance, and there's a lot of there is an incentive to make a much more black and white point than I think anyone who knows what they're talking about would ever make. You could say, look, we were able to identify everything the hackers did while within our systems, and we have profiled all of the infrastructure. We understand the TTPs. We have gotten enough of a sense of all of the systems that they've touched, how they do what they do, the O days, et cetera. And having done a proper architectural review of that incident, we can say that everything we know from these TTPs has been proactively now blocked and disabled in a way that is no longer possible for them to do the same thing. We have even disconnected some of the systems they were after from the same networks that they had access to before, blah, 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 blah. Basically, like in a very specific sense, we understood everything about this cluster of activity, and we have remediated and added friction to the possibility of this attack continuing or being done again in any way. And you can go, okay, I get what you're saying here, right? Like you now understand that there was like a structural fault that meant that this was possible. And you have done things that now mean that, at least in that way, it's no longer possible. Maybe they will come in a different way to do it. And that's a very nuanced statement, but it's also the responsible thing that comes with somebody saying, we did the work, we understood, and now we can tell you guys that this is all good. And that's the kind of statement that we can respect, right? It's the same thing that, like, nobody's thrilled about solar winds, but they went all out on like trying to become like a leader in CI/CD security, and they like started putting out talks about how they wanted to fix, like how they fixed their CI/CD pipeline. How do you not let this happen again? And in that sense, you go, okay, they learned the lesson, like, and they're doing their best to kind of telegraph the lessons learned from that. There's no such nuance when A, it's your lawyers making the statement, and B, it's a corporate statement being turned into an article that clearly is for the sake of like mass consumption and mass blanket assurances. There's no nuance in this at all.
Do you think this has the long tail effect that Aurora had? What do you think, or do you think we've heard the last of it now that they've been evicted? I mean, how do you see the Salt Typhoon thing playing out in the
I
next year or so?
I don't think so. When you say Aurora, that to me means certain things, right? Like Aurora is this beginning of the private sector threat intel investment and understanding, and it caused some really interesting things, right? Like Google pulling out of China. Like there was a lot of interesting repercussions, and it basically brought the valley into reality when it came to cyber espionage. So I don't think this is it. I also don't see them as corollaries in the sense that, like, the telcos, for the most part, at least US telcos, have generally, many of them have generally taken cybersecurity quite seriously. It's just that that didn't mean, like, telcos are really difficult beasts. They are incredibly, like, if anybody has ever gotten the sense from our joking around with Salt Typhoon that I think this is easy, that's not at all what I've ever meant. Not even a little bit. Telcos are incredibly difficult to defend. And they're sprawling. They're made up of acquisitions. You don't have standardization. A lot of your like most valuable systems are fucking just random Linux boxes or like Ericsson devices, appliances. Like it's just a difficult thing to do. Um, but in this particular case, what I'm most curious about, if the Salt Typhoon incident could set any kind of precedent, it would have been with like the FTC getting involved in some kind of regulatory requirements or something like that, which we have not seen. Considering that this is a more regulated industry than just a normal technology sector. In that sense, we haven't seen any of that. And to that point, to the extent that what's left in this situation is really the intelligence fallout of the hack. That's what happened in Aurora, which we never really understood what the fallout was, right? Like they were going after these sorts of FISA collection systems, and you go, okay, there is a huge intelligence loss there that I we'll never be able to approximate what that does. I would imagine if what was originally reported is true. Sorry to be rambly, but if what was originally reported is true, that they went after those sorts of collection systems, and that means that the selectors may have been leaked to the interested party, then the real fallout of this is an intelligence coup that we will not know the extent of, maybe ever, but definitely not anytime soon.
Is it a fair assumption that the West has already that the West has done the same to China and their ISPs?
Oh, for sure.
For sure, right? Costin, you were around in 2009 during the Aurora thing, and I wanted to do a little bit of a comparison with how the disclosure was handled. Was that a lot different from what we were getting, these drips and drabs out of legal and some
Mm.
US government officials dropping news here and there? Or did we get, I mean, can you compare and contrast
Mm.
the disclosure between the two?
Yeah, I think Aurora was probably way more impactful from the point of view of the public and what kind of transpired out of that. Of course, Google had this famous blog post. Again, they pulled out of China. Let's not forget that they essentially forbid Windows within Google. So they said from now on, if you want to work in Google, you can only use a Mac or a Linux machine. So that was, in my opinion, just a massive thing.
Yeah.
Imagine that after this hack, people will say, yeah, from now on, it is forbidden to use Linux because like the Chinese popped all the Linux boxes. So from now on, we're going to use only Mac or Windows. So I think that was way more impactful and was kind of a wake up call for everyone on both sides. On and there were like of course a lot of IOCs and McAfee published about it, and so like different companies out there, they were all publishing IOCs, let's say building transparency, sharing information, which is the total opposite of what we are seeing now. Remember, I called this like the
The
biggest
biggest fail, yeah.
fail of 2024 from my point of view, from the point of view of sharing, of transparency, of what really happened in those networks, sharing information with people across the pond, like myself and our countries. So I would say that there are subtle differences, to say the least. But I hope that at least it kind of serves as a wake up call in the sense that people understand encryption is important. That yeah, even if these law enforcement wiretapping systems are hacked by the Chinese, if you use Signal, you're fine, basically. So that's like the biggest lesson. If people just stop attacking encryption and make insidious or evil recommendations, then I think things will be good. Like use encryption. This is the simplest outcome of this story. Just use encryption, use VPNs, use Signal. Just do not rely on plain unencrypted calls or messengers that can be easily broken or cracked.
I think the lessons taken away from this one are far more disturbing regarding like the fact that once again we have pushed the boundary even further on the general idgaf factor, like I don't give a fuck factor, to like giant hacks, which is like you can there is now no victim under the sun important enough to merit proper disclosure, because clearly you can hack the president elect of the United States, whichever one it could have been, and it's not important enough to merit people acting, corporations acting, or the government acting in a responsible, earth-shattering kind of way. And I think that's the biggest takeaway. This is the most indicative milestone moment of the fact that there are no consequences in cybersecurity whatsoever for corporations at all. And that's the part that should really fuck with us. I'll also say, just for the to wrap up the Aurora bit, uh, I think you can clearly trace. Like I've gone on the record before saying that I think Google is probably the most secure organization on earth. Genuinely, like because of just the way that they do things, because of the way the entire like place is structured from the inside, and there is like um, zero trust is a bullshit term, and almost no organization on earth has anything that looks like zero trust. But if we know what zero trust could or should look like, it's what it looks like inside of Google.
Can you
Um,
expand a little bit on what, like, give me some specifics on what that looks like? You
so
work there, right?
yeah, yeah. I mean, I had the privilege of, I talk shit about Google all day long, just as a company, like as the, because of their corporate decision making. But I also think of it as one of the like most interesting, knowledge dense, forefront of humanity places on earth. And I do miss the internal systems and their way of doing things. I don't think anybody does engineering the way that Google does it, right? Like Google has embraced abstraction in technology in a way that no other big company has. And by that, I mean like you develop a database, a new databasing paradigm, right? And there's a team at Google that will be focused on developing that to its nth degree and providing it essentially almost as a service to every other person at Google. And then, like, there's a joke that like the thing that works inside of Google is already deprecated and is being replaced with this thing that doesn't quite work yet, but is like the newer technology because it's constantly reinventing how it does this thing that's already 10 times better than anything outside of Google has, but somebody created a version of grep that will be 0.3 seconds faster, and therefore the entire company is migrating. But you don't find out about it because you just do your job and you connect it to these APIs, and somebody else is in charge of some other team is in charge of essentially developing databasing as a service for the rest of the company. So everybody's working on this mono repo. Everything is getting recompiled every single time you build something. Everything is built for these distributed systems that somebody else manages. So when Google essentially has created they created what the proto heaven of CI/CD pipelining would look like. And a part of that is we're all on Linux boxes. Everybody is a dev in a sense. So it's like a much easier way to do that. That's not something that you could do at a bank, for example. And when I'm talking about the zero trust stuff, it's, for example, everyone has not just like hardware, what they call nubbies, like it's really unfortunate naming, but the YubiKeys, essentially, every single person has one. Everyone has to use it to access every single service. Those tokens only live for X amount of time. You don't have a VPN. You have, this like you have this like ability, what they call BeyondCorp, right? Which is like you just connect through these short-lived token tunnels using these YubiKeys to cloud services, and then they can just defend the cloud services. You're not supposed to have any source code or anything that you build for Google on your laptop, right? Like you are building everything inside of this distributed system that is being centrally defended. So like there's many, 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 many ways in which when you say zero trust, what you mean is we've designed the architecture of this entire place in a way that is not really, even if you steal the laptop, even if you steal the YubiKey, even if you put a wrench to this person's head, even if that there's only so much damage you can do. There's only so much access you can have. There's only so much that alone will cripple the security posture of that organization. And it's fascinating. Like I talk a ton of shit about Google because of like its corporate stances and the way that its executives do things. But like as a milestone of human development and like technological prowess, there is no place like it on Earth. And like, sorry, I'll stop ranting, but like I just think like you can trace that to its genesis in Aurora. The Chinese gave us that.
First of all, never stop ranting, please. Two, why is it so difficult to replicate this Google BeyondCorp model elsewhere? I know they've done a lot of evangelization of it. Zero trust, like you mentioned, is a big buzzword that everyone's like driving and aiming for. It's part of like the CISA initiative. The CISA Secure by Design pledge is kind of pushing people in this direction. Why is it so difficult to replicate? Is it because Google has all the money and all the brains?
No, well, I think in part it's that they have the brains, but it's a combination of circumstances to consider, and that's why, in part, I don't look at every company and go, "Why aren't you just Google?" Because you don't have the same circumstances on a variety of levels, right? Like Google is dogfooding its own stuff. It has all the talent internally to create paradigm-changing technologies and then forcing other teams to use them. So like it is a unique beast in a way that no other company can just decide to be like Google tomorrow. However, I would also point to, and I've discussed this with people at Google, it's like I really appreciate the kind of work that Heather Adkins does, where like you're getting these like a book on zero trust or a book on what like software engineering looks like at Google. They're actually really good. Like they're great that they put them out there. However, those are the moments when you see how sheltered Googlers are in their thinking, because they basically say, "This is how we do it. You do it too," and you go, every other shop is not going to reinvent databasing every 6 months. No, we can't do it. If you want us to do it this way, fucking productize the thing that you're telling us you already have so we can buy it. Like, that's the weirdest failure of Google Cloud. Like, to Thomas Kurian and like all these like leadership that went into like building up Google Cloud, they were so obsessed with overtaking AWS and just like, how do we make more money than Azure and AWS? And it's like, well, we need to just have a million salespeople that will sell cloud more. And you go, no, you guys have technology that Amazon and Microsoft can only dream of. Just productize the cool shit that you have inside of Google that Googlers leave and they wish they still had. There's a number of companies that exist that are very successful, like CockroachDB, for example, that are just two Googlers left Google and took the thing they had at Google and built it again and now they sell it. And that's like a multi-bajillion dollar company. And it keeps happening over and over again because Google is incapable of productizing its internal discoveries and advancements. And that's why you go into GCP and like, I'll pay you $100 if within an hour you can set up an instance inside of GCP, like cold cocked. I'll pay you $100 if you go try to do that right now. Because you need a fucking PhD in working at Google to open a fucking account and have a cloud instance in GCP. And people at Google cannot understand why they don't sell more cloud than Amazon or like DigitalOcean, where you click two buttons and you have a VPS. They just don't get it.
Never stop ranting, my friend. Let me pivot to a story that I hope will not have you ranting. And it's because we've spent, the entirety of this podcast, all 28 episodes, we've spent making fun of all these blizzards and typhoons and all these namings. And you threat intelligence people with all your fancy schmancy names for all these threats. We have an organization called MISP, MISP, which is not NIST, but MISP, put out a threat actor naming standard with some recommendations on how we fix this mess. I'm sure you're all excited about this. Kostin, let me start with you. Give this guy a little bit of a break because he's been ranting for a long time. Are you excited about this MISP naming standard?
Dude, I don't know if anyone can be excited about it. That's clearly an overstatement. But what I can tell you is that I'm extremely, extremely depressed of the existing mess with the threat actor names. And not only, let's say that people come up with naming schemes for a couple of years and then they suddenly realize that the naming scheme is bad and they have to change it and the new scheme is nothing like the old scheme. And then they give essentially a shit about what other naming schemes look like. They just come up with a new naming scheme of their own and expect everyone to just start using it. So this, to me, I can tell you that is very, very painful. The fact that, I mean, everyone in the CTI industry needs to learn all these names over and over, and then pretty much like everybody on one side of the pond or the other side, like even let's say the Chinese companies now, they have their own naming schemes with APT-Q, APT-C, or like, I don't know, a flying sand eagle and so on and so on. So to me, this is an insane pain, but I mean,
so
I
there
can't
is a
say
problem
it's something
statement.
new.
There is a massive problem statement that's
There is a
established.
massive problem, but it's not new. I tell you that 20 something years ago, the CARO, which is the Computer Antivirus Researchers Organization, met in Hamburg to sort out the naming scheme. So back then, the problem was that all antivirus products, they had different names for, let's say, CIH, very famous virus, or NIMDA, or whatever. Sometimes people even called it CIH, but one antivirus called it W32.CIH, others called it virus.win32.CIH, others called it W32/CIH. It was a total mess. So we met, like it was 30, 35 of us working at all the big antivirus companies here in Hamburg, Virus Test Center Hamburg, with Klaus Brunstein. Everyone was there, like from all the big companies. And everyone tried to come up with their idea. So I think Eugene came up with the matrix. He said that the malware naming is not like something that you can put into two-dimensional, but it's something like a multi-dimensional thing, because it can be several things at the same time. It can be a virus, worm, Trojan, backdoor, packed together for multiple platforms. So that's like a multi-dimensional thing. So you can't name it with just a word or a string of words, let's say in one dimension. Others didn't like it. So my conclusion from that meeting was that it will never, ever in the history of this plan will be possible to agree on a naming scheme for malware or whatever. Everyone will call it differently, and there's essentially no incentive for people to call it the same way. Uh, like it's easier if everybody, and for PR purposes, especially for PR purposes, it is more effective if everyone has their own naming schemes.
It's always for PR purposes, though.
It's always for PR purposes, because you want your naming scheme out there, and all the media and articles are talking about that. And when you Google it, only you have the results, right? So that's why you never put, we discovered this actor also known as. You never put the also known as, because people will Google the also known and they don't get back to your page. So that's why people create new naming schemes which just don't exist on the internet, to essentially do PR and drive the traffic back to their website. So my pain is this. Uh, there's a constant stream of new names. No naming scheme is good. Like, all of them have flaws. There will never be any kind of agreement. Let's all agree that we call this thingy the same. No, everyone will come up with a different name for it, for marketing purposes, PR, and so on. And I think, like, I mean, I'll try to play the devil's advocate, or like the good guy here, and say, like, uh, you need some kind of guidelines. It's the same thing as Yara rules formatting, or the meta section in Yara rules. It would be nice to have like someone come up with some guidelines, which is what
So
these
you're a
guys are
fan.
doing.
You're a
But
fan of this someone attempting to put some standards around it.
I am a fan, but I tell you that from what I have seen in my history, it will fail, and nobody will follow it, because there's no incentive unless you get some kind of a badge, or you create a certification organization, or a test where you test if your names are compliant. And if those tests actually mean anything or bring any kind of value, then yeah, maybe there'll be some incentive. But otherwise, there won't be like any kind of agreement. You will call it Cadet Typhoon, other people will call it Turla, other people will call it APT 600, 762. The Chinese will call it the Flying Bear with the hat. And to be honest, they'll be okay. Like, we won't die. New generations will learn the new names, but sadly, there's no goodwill and no desire to adopt a unique naming scheme. And if you're asking what is the best naming scheme, I think I've said it again. Mandiant, I'm a fan. Like, after all these years, I came to the conclusion that
Oh
the
no.
APT number, it is the best naming
No.
scheme. That's it. Game
No.
over. End of
Absolutely
story.
not.
Get him, Juan.
Absolutely
Get him. Get
not.
him. Get him.
We're just fucking
Get it, get
stoking
it.
it. No, you can't just fucking say that, man. Like, especially the Mandiant thing. Okay.
What
Okay.
is the best naming scheme in your opinion?
No, I don't think there is a good one.
No,
And
what's the
frankly,
best?
there is no good one. There is no good one, because the schemes are dumb in a way, but I don't want them to go away necessarily, because I'm a big fan of the, like, free for all, the naming free for all in some ways. That's not my way of sidestepping this topic. I actually want to talk, like, can we take some time and, like, discuss this, like, kind of comprehensively, because I this is a topic that keeps coming up over and over and over again, and it tends to be someone who's not a practitioner in this area, who is angry about it, who's upset about it, who's annoyed about the naming, and rightly so. But then they want a solution of their own making, and then they don't understand. Like, you usually get a response from somebody who is a practitioner, like, basically saying this is why it's the way that it is. And I'm not even referring to this particular instance, but like Dave Itel, whom I adore, um, came at one point did this, right? He came out and said, "Oh, with your stupid names, like why can't we standardize it?" And around that time, if I remember the timeline correctly, Florian Roth comes up with a pretty good Medium post basically saying like this is why things are the way they are. This is why we have the like menagerie of names. And so this keeps happening over and over again. And I will say this. I personally believe the reason that this keeps happening is because it's an inauthentic problem. It's an illusion of a problem that
An
and therefore
illusion of a problem.
therefore it
I'm not
cannot be
following you, bro.
solved. So and this is where you see that I was a later Wittgensteinian in my philosophy days. But uh, there's a school of philosophy that considers that all philosophical problems are actually basically hallucinations, the way that we would think of in AI, where like a metaphor run amok is making us think that there's an irresolvable paradox of a problem, but the problem doesn't exist. It's just mental misassociations that come with the misuse of metaphors and language. And that's not what anybody signed up for in this podcast. But what I'll say is, um, everybody's obsessed with the namings, and no one is happy about the namings. And then we get into uh, second order discussions about namings when it comes to like with incentives, right? Which is like, oh well, no one has the incentive to not go for the marketing win, so of course they're going to do this the wrong way. And then we kind of run around in circles and go, but what if we had a standard? And you go, okay, the problem here is not a standard. I will deviate for a second before discussing what the problem is to say the reason I don't like the Mandiant naming convention is actually that I think it's not memorable. I think it's confusing. Like numbers and GUIDs and unique identifiers are great for computers. They're not great for human beings. We are, I think, pretty well established experts in the space. And I can tell you, despite having a near eidetic memory in certain situations and Kostin having an even better memory than I do, I don't know the difference between, off the top of my head, between APT 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, or 20, because there's nothing intrinsic in the name that reminds me what the fuck we're talking about. And APT 29 is Russian and APT 30 is Chinese. APT 31 is North Korean. APT 32 is whatever. Like it's just whatever. Like, and then that's built on top of some insane cult about like graduations inside of Mandiant that I think is like the most bizarre and insulting thing ever. Which is why like these motherfuckers didn't have an APT number for Turla, and Turla's been around since 1995. And you're like, oh, it hasn't graduated? It hasn't made it through your little process that says that this is a real APT? It's like, what the fuck are you people talking about? Like, I understand getting unks. I understand getting storms. It makes sense for you to say, here's a cluster of activity. I don't know what it is yet. We're going to put a label on it, and we're going to graduate it to either like this is they do have a good practice. They take the unks and then they go, we're not sure, maybe it's a part of Turla, but we're not sure yet, so we're not gonna collapse them into each other just yet. That is a good practice. They're absolutely correct. I think there's something weird and wrong in whomever decided to create like the graduation process. Whoever thinks they still work at NSA and they're dealing with some great ontology that they can spend 7 years deciding whether this is an actual APT or not. I think that's just like over the top. It's like diamond model bullshit. But in any case, you do have a graduation process. You do have a deliberation process that says, hey, we're going to figure out if this is the same thing as this other APT or not. The reason I think that this is a fake problem, an illusion of a problem, is that APT naming is just branding for clusters. And we're mad that people don't use the same branding, when in reality, the problem is that people don't compare clusters. The names are just the labels. You said, here's a box, here's an empty box that I will call APT 405. and I'm going to put all these things in the box. And whatever goes in the box is what constitutes APT 405. I'm going to tell you that I am working on APT 405, but I'm not going to tell you the whole contents of the box. And therefore, you're going to take it and you're going to go, well, but my box is constituted with 70% of the shit that's in your box, and then another 30% that is not in your box, that maybe is because I have different visibility, maybe it's because I made a mistake, maybe it's because you made a mistake, maybe it's because we have, you have better researchers and I don't, whatever. But the constituent elements of these two boxes are not the same. So I'm going to label this one APT 405-C, and you're going to have APT 405-A, and we're going to have the same fucking problem no matter what your stupid RFC says, because you're not comparing the constituent elements of it. And this is the problem that we have is not actually a branding problem. It's a methodology problem. The problem that we have is that because this has all been mediated by marketing for the past 10 years, we have never actually set a methodological standard that says, if you want to play in the big leagues, if you want to be respected in this industry, then give us a complete machine ingestible list of what your telemetry says constitutes APT 405. Give us the full fucking list of tags. And this is why Synapse is the only tip that works, right? Like, tag everything in Synapse, and I'm going to be able to compare your taggings and ingest them the way they are. And I'm going to understand the logical relationships between these different constituent elements. And I can replicate that myself. And then I'm going to put that and overlay it over my bit. And I can say, this is 95% the same thing. I can have a conversation with these people about what the remaining 5% is, but I'm an asshole if I go and rename this something else, because this is 95% the same thing that Mandiant had already said. The problem that we have here is that there's certain organizations that have, and I promise I'm about to stop, but there's certain organizations that have decided that IOCs are intellectual property, and IOCs are what are secret sauce, and that's what makes them smarter than the other guy, and that's what makes them have a better product than the other guy. So therefore, fuck you being able to defend yourself. Even if you pay me, I'm not going to show you everything I have. And therefore, we cannot have these discussions on the real terms, which is to say, I understand the completeness of what constitutes this threat actor as far as our human knowledge goes, and therefore I can give you a quantitative and qualitative answer as to whether what we're both looking at is the same fucking thing or not. And I don't give a flying fuck if you use hyphens or not in your names. That is not going to get fixed by a stupid fucking RFC.
Costin, you're a fan of the APT 2829 thingy. He's not. I mean, what makes that the best of all these terrible situations?
Well, I tell you that first of all, there's multiple problems in this whole discussion, and Juan touched on some of them. And I was thinking that one, possibly the biggest issue with all the things, which is, again, why I'm such a big fan of the Mandiant naming scheme, is that historically, when Mandiant was saying APT1, they published 70 pages research paper with everything they know about APT1. And from that moment on, people said this is APT1. And then if somebody someone small comes, we don't call it APT1, we call it something else, but it's a subset of what Mandiant said APT1. Shut the fuck up. It's APT1. This is the Mandiant paper, it's APT1, right? And what worries me is we are seeing less and less and less of these big research papers that come out and say, this is whatever. This is shit A, this is shit B, shit C, and so on. People don't do that anymore. What they do instead is press releases, without IOX, sometimes like without saying anything useful, only that, oh yeah, this is a very sophisticated threat actor which uses no IOX, lives off the land, and we can't really tell you what it is, but we know what it is. You can't know it. Like, see, this is, if you're asking me, the biggest issue is that we don't get that many papers anymore, like a big, thorough research papers, comprehensive, about specific big threat actors or clusters of activity.
That's a
Uh,
different problem, though. That's not the part of the naming
no,
problem.
because that is a root issue for the lack
Hmm.
of good names. That's why everybody comes up with their own names because, yeah, your blog post of 500 words is okay-ish, but it doesn't include everything that we think is
Hmm.
that. So we're
Hmm.
going to call it something else, not to get into conflict with your tiny little blog post. So without a reference
No.
big paper,
Yeah.
thorough, competent, very important, without a competent research paper of the kind, let's say, that Mandiant has been putting out all this, and not just Mandiant, by the way. Back at my old job, I like to think that we try to publish these big research papers in
Hmm.
which we define this is, I don't know, Careto or whatever. And then I don't think that people used other names for it, right? If it's a big, thorough research paper, then people tend to adopt the name. Whoever doesn't do that, shame on them, if you ask me, shame on them, or they just don't have the same ability to map what they're saying onto that. So this is what worries
Yeah.
me. But
Yeah.
like, if you want to go back into the naming mess, again, this to me is not so bad. Like this, the new standard is good. There's like some kind of recommendations. I don't agree with all of them, of course. Nobody will ever agree with all of them. So we have to politely agree to disagree, I guess.
I
This MISP.
politely agree. I love that. So what people didn't see, and Ryan tried to sneakily record it, was us having the pre-show conversation where I go, "Do
Uh,
you guys know who the fuck wrote this? Because I feel like I'm gonna insult the shit out of them during this thing." And
oh,
like,
they're very
and
nice people.
I'm sure they are, and I really don't mean to like trash their
So who is
thing.
this
And
MISP people?
Very nice people.
Really,
they're
Costin,
very nice
you're
people.
aware of this MISP organization? I gotta be
Of
honest. I had not
course,
heard about them
everyone is.
before now.
Yeah, like MISP is a thing. Like,
Really?
I mean, if you're in this business, you probably use MISP. I mean, if you don't use MISP, you're probably
you're
either
lucky.
Google. You're either Google and you built your own MISP with some kind of a magic language that you developed specifically for that project or for the database that runs the project, or
Okay.
you're like small and you don't
Okay.
need it.
This is touching on just the right thing. And this, I'm going to come off like as a shill and an asshole at the same time. So, okay. Look,
I'm gonna record this.
oh no, please don't.
Oh wait,
So,
it's already being recorded.
yeah. So, look, this industry, I agree with what Kosin is saying, though I would not put the onus on papers. Papers are what we develop, and we should publish them, but they they tend to act as the surrogate for what should actually exist and does not, which is a machine ingestible programmatic way of determining not just IOCs, but the relationships, the logical relationships between these IOCs in an encoded fashion. And that's what TIPS, threat intelligence platforms, were supposed to do. That's before people like Recorded Future starting to lie to everybody about what a tip is in order to sell their bullshit business intelligence platform as if it were a tip. But also, most of these, like Threat Quotient and all that bullshit, they were never good tips. They were just like web UIs for storing IOCs. It's telling that you referred to APT1 because the reason APT1 was able to be produced and analyzed properly is that you had genius people like Vizzy Stark who developed things like Nucleus, which was the industry's like proto threat intelligence platform that was developed at Mandiant in order to do the analysis for APT1. They knew they needed a thing and they built a thing in order to have a programmatic, um, uh, reanalyzable ready for institutional memory type of system that would allow them to do this investigation. And that's what a tip should be. And I said I'm going to sound like a shill because I've gone on the record before saying that Vertex Project Synapse, which is the new iteration, the commercial iteration of what Nucleus was, is the only working threat intelligence platform in this industry. And I say that not just because I respect Visi, but because it's an intelligence platform that happens to be able to handle IOCs very well, along with everything else. And the reason for that is you have a model, you have an ontology, you have an enrichment mechanism, you can essentially establish clusters by virtue of what. Why did you bring this IOC here? Oh, because there is a shared certificate between the two. Why did you bring this IOC here? Because I did an enrichment with passive DNS from this domain to that IP. Why did you bring, so like you can actually go back and say, this is where we made a mistake and remove that link, or this is where we should have kept tracking this, or this is where 2 weeks after our publication, some new information came around, and this is how it fits into this cluster. It's a repeatable, expandable thing, which is why I wrote the fucking paper about like threat cluster profiling instead of us using just marketing terms. But I tried to treat the topic in a comprehensive fashion. It's very fucking telling that MISP of all organizations is the one that thinks that the reason we don't have good names is that we didn't just all sit down and say, this is how we're gonna structure them. Please use a hyphen, not a dot. You should do this, you can't do that. It's not because we didn't fucking think of setting a standard and then pinky promising about it. Kostin just said that people at Caro met up a fucking decade ago, or God knows how long, and had the
50
fucking
decades.
conversation. It's not because we didn't decide to have a talk. It's not because we didn't think to be Boy Scouts about naming. There are bad practices in this space. I think CrowdStrike in particular is probably the worst offender when it comes to this sort of shit, because they go and they name things all the time and they never show their work, and they now they don't even publish blogs. They're just like the whatever spider thing. Anyways, contact your sales representative to know what we're talking about. And you're like, cool, thanks for showing up, guys. We haven't seen you in any of the trust groups in a long time. Take care. Like it's the ultimate version of not showing your work. But it's very telling that MISP is the organization that does this, because MISP is the worst threat intelligence, the worst attempt at a threat intelligence platform that everyone in this industry has had to suffer at some point. Because every organization at some point has said, we need a system in order to do our investigations. And then people go, maybe we can build it. And you go, that's a lot of work. We don't really have that much engineering talent. And then you go, hey, there's a really cool one over there. And then the people who give you money say, that's a lot of money. We're idiots. So instead of paying a couple of $100,000, we would rather employ 2 to 3 people in order to maintain an open source thing that doesn't work, because somehow that's cheaper, which it's not, obviously, because a single full-time employee in the United States costs 3 times as much as what it would to pay for a real threat intelligence platform. But we're going to try it anyways. And then the first thing you do is you get MISP, and that shit doesn't fucking work at all, and it's clunky and it's awful. And then you go, maybe we'll try OpenCTI, and then you try that, and you go, oh, this isn't great, but it's a little better than MISP. And then you go, God, I wish I worked at a shop that invested into our tools. And then eventually you leave and you go work somewhere that has Synapse. Like every company has gone through that bullshit phase at some point, or they're in the middle of it right now.
This man is taking no prisoners today.
Fuck.
What is Kostin showing us there?
Kostin just annihilated me in like a picture.
Quickly,
in big paper.
Let's. I want to dig into the actual.
Juan, you need to do that quickly before Microsoft comes and names it something.
Yeah, before Microsoft renames it something Eagle. The paper is there. It's like 70% of the way. Kostin, let's finish it together.
Listen, the MISP recommendations, I mean, the MISP recommendations, I'll go through like 4 or 5 of them. One is reuse existing names. Check existing databases like the MISP Galaxy and reuse a name if a match is found. Checkbox, right? We like that.
Reuse
Sure,
names,
yeah, that's what you should do. If you were honest as a producer, you would endeavor to do this. And I'll tell you this. if you can find any blog post on the Sentinel Labs thing where there is a clear other name for a threat actor and we didn't AKA it, please let us know and we'll fix it. I think it's an unacceptable practice to know that you're referring to something else. And even if you want a marketing branded, show your fucking work and say ESET calls this blah, blah, blah. That's just being professional.
Especially if ESET wrote about it before you.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that defeats the purpose of marketing. It says ensure, now the other recommendation is ensure uniqueness. Names must be unique and not derived from dictionary words or other context, and use consistent formats. Names should be a single word. If multiple words are needed, use dashes. We like that or we don't like that?
What the fuck do they mean, not dictionary words? Like I have to invent? Like we have to make up new words? Like
what they mean
non-English language words?
No, you mean like someone comes and they say, yeah, we discover something new and we are calling it the brown bear. And then you go to Google and you Google brown bear and you have like 15 million pages with brown bear. And it's like a total mess.
But didn't they say it should be like a single word though?
Yes.
Then it's
Name
impossible.
should be a single word. If multiple parts are needed, use dashes. So, Secret Blizzard with a dash.
No. But why? Like that is a paradoxical request. You cannot. It's not even SEOable. You cannot optimize for SEO if it's a single fucking word, and then you also want it to be unique and like it just doesn't make. Sorry.
The other recommendation is to use standard encoding. Use 7-bit ASCII to avoid localization issues. Avoid confusion with malware names. And this one I want to flag because they say threat actor names should not reference tools, techniques, or malware. Example. Avoid examples like Turla. What does that mean?
What the fuck? Like that is actually a good example of a single word, unique, non-English language, non-dictionary word that is a classic example of a good name, and they use it as an example on the false premise that means that it's like the name of a malware. There is no malware named Turla. That is just the threat name. Like it's wrong. This whole thing. What pisses me off about this kind of shit is that you get somebody who doesn't do this work clearly, who says, oh, the reason these fucking idiots have never fixed this problem is I never came around to tell them how to do it. Here we go. Here's your rules. You're like, bro, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, it's almost disrespectful. And like,
Artwan, let me flip it and ask you to fix the problem then, because you've done an incredible job of identifying all the problem spaces.
Just bitching.
I have just named you Cyberzar, and I gave you a task to fix this naming shit. Like, what is your first priority? Like, is it tractable? Is it even fixable, or should we just have this free for all and then let everyone pay for tips to manage it?
It is absolutely fixable, but you fix it by changing the methodology of the industry, by driving requirements, and not by virtue of even focusing on the names at all. You will not fix this problem by insisting that people change names. Also, to be honest, any effort wherein you think that you're going to change or fix an endemic problem by suggesting people do something is it's a fool's errand. That is not how you're going to fix any standardization problems. You do it by driving utility. So the way that I would fix this problem in my magical mystery universe where I'm CyberSAR and have all these infinite resources is I would
fire all the marketing people first. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I don't care about that. Someone has to pay for this shit. I would establish an industry-wide tip instance of Synapse. Let's not talk about the financial incentives here because I can't figure that out right now. But I would say we have a single, let's say a P2P mechanism, a peer-to-peer mechanism that connects everybody's Synapse instances. It has a way of showing us, without me revealing to Kostin every indicator that I have and every bit of research that I have and every incident response piece of material that I have that I cannot share, there's a mechanism wherein his Vertex Synapse instance and my Vertex Synapse instance can talk to each other and then go, your cluster, which you name blah, 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 is 75% constituent of my cluster, which I name blah, blah, blah. And the point is, if you have what we need is a systematic fabric of being able to compare notes at an atomic technical level, wherein I can say, we fix this information asymmetry problem wherein CrowdStrike and SentinelOne obviously are not incentivized to share all of their IOCs with one another, but they still have a way by which they can programmatically check in with each other and say, what you call light basin is what I call blah, 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 up to 85% of whatever. And if we want to resolve the difference, we should meet up and talk about the remaining 15, because you're not going to tell me every indicator you have, and I'm not going to tell you every indicator I have, but we can at least have an objective answer about what we mean. And we can continue to track that over time. And you can have a verifiable third party still be able to walk into this and say, from a technical standpoint, what you just did is bullshit because you just published a blog post that is 100% covered by what Kaspersky claims is called Turla, and you renamed it for no fucking reason. Fuck you. But that has to come from a technical underpinning on a systemic basis. And that's how you fix this problem. And then people can name it whatever the fuck they want, because then you can put a fucking GUID on it and have a literal mathematical ability to verify each other's work.
Costin, what do you think about that idea?
So, if I understand correctly, Juan, what you're suggesting is money solves everything, right?
This is what, but
No. Yes, but
That's
no.
what it sounds like. How much
what-
is
what I'm-
Synapse?
It's a low six figures, like a you know.
For me and my little threat intelligence company, can we afford
They'll
that?
give you a demo instance. So that's fine.
Demo?
Like
Can
those
I
things-
synchronize it or
Costin makes a great
cross-check it
point in
against you?
two ways. Costin makes a great point in two ways. One, it's a very, very costly solution. And two, you're putting the power in the hands of one tip.
Well, it's not a comparatively costly solution. I think this is an important myth that needs to be dispelled. And this especially, I'm glad we're talking about it with MISP as a part of the discussion, because every company has the idiotic need to, like, somebody says, let's buy Synapse. And then some genius is the first person ever to go, oh, we don't need Synapse. There's an open source thing right here called MISP. Why don't you idiots use that? And you go, I'm not going to reveal the pricing, though it is standard, actually. It's one of the few companies that has standard fucking pricing in this industry and isn't price gouging everybody. If Synapse costs the same amount of money, actually less than a single full-time engineer in the United States. So every fucking idiot executive who has said, well, we have Synapse at home, just use MISP open source and we'll get a couple of engineers to support it internally, has financially made a really stupid fucking decision, because you're assigning nearly 2 to 3 times as much budget to support a shittier solution internally than if you had just paid a company that does it well and gives you a support SLA. So, it's not more expensive.
But Costin, in your world, you have a small threat intelligence shop you just mentioned, and you can't afford a big vendor. Isn't an open source alternative the best option for everyone?
I mean, yeah, that's the discussion. And again, keep in mind that MISP, there are significant financial backing between MISP. MISP is financed by the European Union, so it's like one of those big projects that were originally funded by the EU, and something that grew. And essentially, I think every cert on this planet, every single one, uses MISP. Every ISP on this planet, they use MISP to ingest IOCs, either from certs or from other sources. Why? Because it's pretty much the standard. It may not be the best one out there, but again, it's open source. The guys who develop it, they are, like, again, nice people, knowledgeable people, very smart people. and they are open to suggestions.
So
Of course, it doesn't like do everything. Again, I have not
okay, we
been
solved it.
blessed with
Here's the
access
thing.
to signups to compare it. Sorry about that.
Kostin, we just solved the problem. We just solved the problem.
Tell
MISP
us,
is
tell
going to
us.
solve the problem. And I'm dead
Mhm,
fucking serious
mhm.
because you said the MISP people are nice people.
Yeah.
The core of Synapse is actually open source. Cortex, the core engine of Synapse is open source. It's the cool UI and all the nice features on top that you're paying for, but the core is
Mhm.
open source. So if MISP is this serious about solving this problem, they can develop a shared fabric with the Vertex Cortex open source mechanism so that MISP instances and Synapse instances can share IOCs frictionlessly. And then they will be helping to solve the fucking problem. It will have nothing to do with names. Give me a shared functional utilitarian standard between threat intelligence platforms. Ideally, one that even takes information asymmetrical exchanges into account. And then you solve the fucking problem, and I will salute every person at MISP for genuinely fixing this shit. That's the kind of thing we should be seeing out of MITRE. That's the kind of investment I would have liked to see out of CISA. If you really wanted to see change here, what you needed to do was invest into making tools that create de facto standards by virtue of providing security utility. It's the only way you change anything at that level.
Can we move on, or is there any water left to ring from this rock costume?
Uh, Again, from the point of someone who lives in the European Union, my taxes, my money essentially are funding this MISP thingy. So the question is, what is the U.S. government funding? Like, where is
Fucking nothing.
the platform that is better than MISP funded by the U.S. government? So
Great point.
that's the only thing. From the $4 billion budget of CISA and the 25,000 employees they have.
I'm gonna move on very quickly. We have two small stories
Before
to
I have
get
an
to.
aneurysm, yeah.
No, you're not gonna have an aneurysm, my friend. No,
We're not
never
gonna
stop.
solve this problem, right?
Not
We're
like
not gonna
this. Not
solve it
like
ever.
this. Not like this. Not as long as we're a cottage, like artisanal industry.
According to a company,
I want someone to come up with a naming scheme where every name is written with Chinese characters, so that nobody can pronounce it or write it or remember it.
I put an emoji in one of my APT names, and I didn't work for a company at the time, and you can just suck it if you don't like it. So yeah,
Fully agree.
this problem isn't going away at all, ever, right?
Not
No.
not until threat intel as a practice evolves outside of being an artisanal farm to table industry.
All right, we leave that one there.
What if like again?
Stop trying to move us along, man. We're trying to have a conversation.
So remember Snowden leaks and all those things, Maker's Mark, right?
Yeah,
Things like
yeah.
Gossip Girl,
Yeah.
Byzantine Hades, Byzantine Rain. What if, let's say, the U.S. government, whoever, just starts saying like, this is the name for Turla, this is the name for Sophacy, this is
They
like
have.
our name,
They have.
and just
Like,
have a page somewhere
NCSC
where
does it.
this. It's ironic, in my opinion, that the Thai CERT from Thailand has such a page, and the U.S. government does not have one.
Well,
That's
they
ironic.
might argue if you consider MITRE just close enough to the U.S. government to look like the U.S. government. MITRE has the MITRE Galaxy thingy, which is it's as close as you'll get to a government sponsored ish attempt at a taxonomy between the names. At the same time, I think it has some pretty bad practices, like. It clearly has some semi-political idiotic review about sources. So like it won't put stuff by like Positive Technologies or Kaspersky, or like it'll randomly, it also, I think, tends to validate a lot of the shitty practices in the industry, because bullshit company B, we've never heard of before and wrote a blog that was full of mistakes, added a name, and now they're part of the MITRE Galaxy naming convention next to Mandiant, who discovered that APT. right? Like in some ways, this isn't really as simple as creating an Excel spreadsheet, which we already have, by the way, right? Like Pasquale and a few other folks have had like an open sourced Excel spreadsheet that I think is like 70% accurate in a lot of the
Mhm.
stuff that's in there. But the problem, like I said, anyone who wants to solve the naming problem by solving the naming is looking at this at entirely the wrong level.
Can I move on now?
Yes, yes, yes.
Thank you.
We'll try.
According to someone called Nextron Research. No, seriously, on
Florian.
Twitter, according to Nextron Research, a new variant of the CIA Hive attack kit named Xdr33 by 360net Lab has surfaced on VirusTotal. AV detection is very low, and there are many overlaps. Costin, what do we know about CIA Hive attack kit?
I think these are some of the source codes that were originally leaked in Vol 7. Those kind of leaks. What Symantec has been calling Longhorn, I think Kaspersky was calling it the Lamberts. In particular, this hive is known as the Pink Lambert. It seems that somebody took the source codes and compiled an IoT malware botnet, like self-replicating with exploits from those source codes. And this is what NetLab, which by the way is a very interesting company, they're a kind of a subsidiary of Chihu360, focusing exclusively on these kind of IoT threats, honeypotting. A very, very interesting company that used to publish a lot of very cool blogs. Unfortunately, I don't know what happened there, but lately they haven't been publishing too much. So this malware in particular, they spotted in 2022. I looked a bit at the new variant. It has the same CNC hard-coded inside. It has the same encryption, which is XOR 0xFF for the config file. So it's pretty much from the same family. But if you ask me, because it uses the same CNC and the CNC expired maybe 2023, it's not 100% new, right? So it just connects to an expired CNC, which by the way is available for sinkholing. If anyone has the sinkholing infrastructure and we want to see how big this IoT botnet is, it's pretty easy to grab that domain from the
How have
sample
you
and
not
sinkhole.
picked it up already? Why didn't you grab it?
I don't have the sinkholing infrastructure anymore.
Yeah, but buy the domain before the episode comes out, man. Silas has the sinkholing infrastructure.
He has?
Buy it.
Let's
yeah, of
do
course.
it.
Yeah.
I'll buy it and redirect it to Silas. No worries.
Yeah, do it. I
We'll
mean,
do
what
it.
I like to do with CIA CNCs is redirect them to my blog. That's what that's what
With
I do.
what?
To my blog.
CNCs?
Yeah, like Mercury Vapor just directs
Oh
to my
my
blog
God.
from like the
Oh
Red
my.
Lambert era. That just goes to epicturla.com. That's
Oh, that's painful. Like, oh
yeah.
God. How come that you still have a visa?
Because I was born here and they can't do a goddamn thing about it. That's I love this country.
Nextron says AV detection rate is very low, although there are many overlaps. Costin, you says this is an IoT botnet. What do we make of this story?
I think it's pretty obvious and clear. This is not the Lambert. This is not Longhorn. This is not US. It's just someone who took the source codes, maybe as a joke, as a false flag, as whatever, and they built an IoT malware on top of those things with a bit of changes, with their own new features, exploits. If I remember correctly, it has an exploit inside. So it's definitely not the big guys, but someone just piggybacking on the leaked source codes.
We got news out of the FBI. The FBI? Give me one second. Let me just grab this quickly. We just got breaking news. As we're speaking, the US announced sanctions against a company called China's Integrity Technology over alleged hacking sweep. This is related to Flax Typhoon, which we saw at LabsCon 1. This China's Integrity Technology Group has been sanctioned. In a statement, the State Department said that Integrity Tech was a large Chinese government contractor with ties to the Ministry of State Security, and its hackers were working at the direction of Beijing to target critical infrastructure in the US and overseas. So there's while we joke about nothing happening, we're not getting any information. It's quite obvious that there was a lot happening behind the scenes, and we've seen sanctions here. We just talked about OFAC. Why would the Chinese be interested in what's
Why
happening
would
in
the
OFAC?
Chinese ever be interested in what's happening in OFAC?
So this Beijing-based company is being accused of being behind Salt Typhoon. There's an advisory, Five Eyes advisory from US, British, Canadian, Australia, New Zealand cyber officials accusing Disintegrity people of compromising more than 250,000 devices around the world. So it looks like the US government is going to be, the US government is pushing back against this with some sanctions. What do we make of this? I know I say it's breaking, it literally just got published.
I really hope Salt Typhoon is the threat actor that was inside of OFAC. That would be fucking hilarious. that would make my absolute day.
Yeah, it could be. By the way, we need to say that it was known since September of last year that this company was behind Salt Typhoon. I think Christopher Wray, the FBI director, said that at a conference when he was talking about the FBI shutting down the Raptor train. I think it was called.
Yeah, he selfishly fucked the people that told him about it, who were going to publish it at LabsCon like 2 days later because he needed something to say at a conference. So that's cool, FBI. Thank you. But
yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. We all remember. We remember.
All right.
And never forget.
Never forget.
The last story on my list is this Cyberhaven browser extension issue that we talked about last week. Has there been any update, Costin? What do you know about who the attackers were? What is this supply chain thing? Help me understand what we know.
I kept looking into this, and I mean, there's a couple of researchers that I know that are looking as well, finding more extensions that have been targeted. I looked maybe a bit from the point of view of someone who wanted to know like the attribution, to understand who is behind it. So I tried to do some infrastructure mapping using my new platforms. And I discovered, again, this is not public information, so it will become public through our podcast, that there is actually overlap between some of the CNCs used with the other extensions and infrastructure associated with something called the Savvy Seahorse. Now, Savvy Seahorse was originally discovered.
Savvy.
Who named this shit?
Like, can you name it like a Suave Seahorse?
I'm going to start doing them in Spanish and get some diversity. We need some diversity. We need some diversity in this space.
So yeah, this was originally discovered by a company called Infoblox in February of last year. So they have a pretty good, I think, pretty thorough blog post on this. And there's like a detail there which attracts my attention: the fact that this threat actor, they deposit money to a personal account and then transfer them to a bank in Russia. So this would kind of suggest that the threat actor has some kind of a nexus to Russia. And also they are very big into Facebook ads, which is essentially what people noticed with these extensions, that whoever was doing it was targeting big Facebook advertisers. It's a bit of interesting to quote from the Infoblox research paper that Savvy Seahorse campaigns are sophisticated. They use ChatGPT, they use WhatsApp bots, automatic responses. So it's like maybe not your typical cyber criminal thingy. And also, I think what is interesting is that besides this Infoblox blog from February 2024, there's been very little information about this group, which is operating since at least August 2021. They're targeting Russians, Polish, Italians, German, Czech, Turkish, French, Spanish, English speakers, as well as potential victims in Ukraine, which is, again, quite interesting. There was a huge amount of IOCs from Infoblox and ValidIn, a wonderful company. They expanded on the IOCs from Infoblox. I think they published about 2,000 domains.
IOCs, so we have IOCs.
Yeah. We have thousands of IOCs for the Savvy Suavemente Caballo. and that allowed us to connect it to the new Cyberhaven hack and the associated extensions.
Shout out to the guys at Valadin. I met those guys at
Yeah,
They do
LabsCon last
great.
year.
They do
Yeah.
great stuff.
fantastic.
And
Yeah,
I mean, they're honestly they're the shop that has sustained the rest of us after Microsoft killed Passive Total. Like that was such a fucking
Let's give them a free
whole
ad. What does Valadin do?
Valadin is a passive total like enrichment, sorry, a passive DNS enrichment uh, uh, platform, and they have great data. They have a really good product. They iterate super quickly. For at least I can speak for I'll speak for us at Sentinel One, where it's like when we relied heavily on passive total, and I know a lot of people in the industry did, and when Microsoft arbitrarily fucking bought it and blew it up, we had this big hole in like having good passive DNS, and evaluated a bunch of different things, and Hagel brought Valadin, and that's the one we ended up going with. You know, among other, like we have access to other stuff, but like Valadin has been actually like the one that took up the mantle on that front. So super nice dudes. They work really hard. They're very quick to like iterate on ideas, and the data has been great. So yeah, I can't shout them out like enthusiastically enough.
The Cyberhaven thing is settled. I mean, all the browser extension
I
problems
think
through.
would be nice if other people looked into the connections between this cluster of activity. We don't have a name for it except the cyber.
Oh, we can fix that right now, man.
Let's call it the what?
Let's think about this. Well, you
How
already
do you
have a
say
name.
heaven in Spanish?
You already
Savvy
cielo.
Seahorse.
You already
What?
have a name for the threat actor. What
Mm.
we if we're being honest here, what we should name is a new campaign by the Savvy Seahorse threat actor, right? Like
Fair enough.
Dot
that's what
A.
yeah. Dot A dash
Would
something.
don't use 8-bit.
It's got to be ASCII 7. What is it? 7 compliant. No emojis. No, fuck the Chinese. They can't
this,
name anything. It has
the
to be
Spanish characters like the accented
tildes. No
e,
ñ.
e,
No
enya,
ñ.
yes.
Yeah.
These Savvy Seahorse people have been active since at least August 2021. So this is a group that people have been tracking for a long time.
But not so much research again, not that many, and I think it would be interesting if other people with access to Valadin, to Hunt.io, to Silent Push, to Silas technologies, my technologies would just look into the connections between them and publish more on it.
What is Costin's Technologies? You can't just drop that there and not have me ask.
It's essentially what allowed me to connect these two. So I wonder if it's just like something that I am seeing based on my very modest again platform and access that we have been developing for some time. And it would be very good if we got some additional confirmation and that more people could confirm the link between the two.
All right, I'm overdue for another bout of cough medicine, so I'm gonna put a bow. I'm gonna put a bow on this episode. Thank you guys very much for putting up with me.
No, thank you, man. So what people don't understand is Ryan's had a fucking fever and has been sick for days, and we didn't even think we were gonna be able to record this. We almost had to get like a stand-in, and
oh, by the way,
so
yes. Thanks to Gabe, Kimberly Price, and a few others who, right away volunteered to step in and co-host and host the episode for us. I woke up this morning thinking, you know what, we can push this to tomorrow, but it ruins my Saturday. Or we can push it to Sunday. Now it's going to ruin my Sunday, so I might as well just put up with it and be done with it. Some closing shout-outs, Costin. We're heading into a new year. Give the people an uplifting kind of outlook on what you expect this year.
So yeah, maybe without essentially going back to the naming mess and all those issues, I hope that people are more careful when talking about the idea of creating new threat actors instead of just using standardized names or whatever has been in the industry for a decade, or sometimes like one was saying 1995, right? So that's like kind of a wishful thinking from my side. Share more IOCs, please. Share more things publicly. Publish thorough research papers, detailed with what you think is actor X or whatever. Rely less on AI doing your job and try to embed the vastness of your experience and knowledge and complement it with AI as opposed to, let's say, outsourcing everything to that. And again, my main worry is about elections. Finally, in Romania, they decided that presidential elections will take place in March, and it seems like it's a rerun. Like the same people will
Are we going
possibly
to abide by
again.
the results?
If we like them.
Depends. If our guys win, yes.
On that quite optimistic note, Juanito, some closing thoughts as you look forward to 2025?
I am actually looking forward to 2025, which is the first year of my life I've ever looked forward to. I'm serious. No, I mean, as somebody who's had just like a very bad outlook on life for a very long time and has had to work very hard to change that, this is like a landmark moment for me coming into a new phase of my life and actually looking forward to it. So I'm quite happy to see where this is going. I have a list I have a 3-page double-sided list of people that I intend to personally write and thank for everything from the past year, just to start things off on the right note. Because frankly, a lot of folks have been there for me in this past year in every possible way, whether supporting like project like LabsCon, which I wouldn't be able to do without like the folks who decide to sponsor for basically nothing in return. Amazing people like, Ryan, obviously you have held the fort down with me from the beginning, but also Courtney Duff, without whom the whole thing would be basically
Shout out to Courtney.
impossible. And
The
then even
GOAT.
on a personal, the GOAT, man, and Chris St. Myers, who stuck it out, whether he worked at S1 or not, he's been there for the whole thing. But that's just one thing, right? Like there have been so many ways in which amazing people have been there for me, and I've been really bad about answering people's messages and emails. I actually answered an email from August the other day, so don't take it personally if I haven't answered you, but I'm going to try to make my way through a list of thank yous. And on that note, I also look to the MISP guys. I really don't mean to insult them or what they're trying to do. I don't want us to become an industry that's so cynical that people can't throw their hat in the ring and say, hey, I think this is bad. We should try something new. It's not that I want to dissuade them. It's more that um, there's a certain level of frustration with starting conversations over and over and over again and getting to the same results and getting to the same conclusions. Um, and it's because the problems are not simple, but it's also because those solutions don't work. If they work, we would have solved it. So we don't need a blog. What we need are utility-based incentives for implementations of standards that come baked into technologies that people want to use. And that just means that when you develop a standard, what it means is we need companies to be able to have interoperable offerings. It's what the US government has been desperate for on the cloud side of things, and it's what security vendors should strive to. And instead, we tend to think of it as like encouraging vendor lock-in by having different schemas and having different ways of storing information. And until we get past that, like absolute horseshit practice of holding people hostage as customers, we're not going to solve any of these problems.
Very, very nicely said. This podcast is about 6 months old, and I know we make a lot of fun about our 55 and 73 listeners and so on. It has grown incredibly in the last 6 months, to the point where it's shocking that we have so many listeners, to be quite honest with you. I want to thank the listeners for hanging in with us. I want to thank our group chat in Signal for pushing us to think deeper a lot about a lot of these issues, and so we can have real, honest, blunt conversations. I want to thank the listeners, and I want to wish everyone...
Are you going to drop real numbers now? Are you going to stop telling people we only have 53 listeners?
And I just want to close by saying Happy New Year to everyone.
Happy New Year.
Could this be the year when finally Ryan gets a cat?
Oh,
Who?
God, no. No
Ryan
way.
gets a cat.
Cats
I have
that-
two. One has two. Where's your cat, Ryan?
I have
Ryan's
a little
a dog
puppy here.
person.
I'm a dog
Yeah.
guy. I'm not a cat guy. But I do enjoy every episode at Juan and his baby holding.
Toro here.
It's amazing.
Happy New Year, everyone.
Happy
Happy
New
New
Year.
Year.